All right, we are live for post type testing.
Cool. So the idea I had with this was basically we kind of have all these different post types in the IndieWeb. We've got, I don't know how many there sort of are, but there's a bunch of them. They're all fairly standardized now. So there's always a problem when people are making their sites or their readers mainly is what I was thinking initially, that you want to be able to accept these post types and display them correctly. And there's currently no real way to test it apart from manually going in and creating a bunch of posts of how you think they should work and seeing if it displays correctly on your website or on your reader. So I thought it'd be good to have some sort of testing for this. I mainly base the idea off of WordPress has what they call unit tests for themes, which is not really a unit test, but it's just a big, it's basically like a database of a million different posts and all their different versions, like with really long titles or with short titles or with featured images that are wide, features images that are tall and narrow, etc., to see how themes handle basically every sort of variation. And I thought that would probably be something that would be useful in the IndieWeb as well. What else? So yeah, the two main places I thought of testing was on people's personal websites to check how things look, and in readers, which is basically the same thing, look at the post work. And then a few sort of other things came to mind in discussions already. So if there's a set of tools that make micropub requests, it can then be used sort of for testing your micropub endpoint, that it accepts a bunch of different properties and doesn't mess anything up. It can also possibly test that you've marked up your own posts correctly, like your microformats markup is okay. If it can somehow test that, since it already has a list of what the microformat should more or less look like. Testing micro sub-servers, if they accept everything correctly as well. And that's about it so far. And then, so I thought there were sort of different parts to potential tools or helping with this. The definite first one that would be absolutely required in my vision of this would be basically a big giant list of example posts and how they be marked up and what sort of post type they are. I sort of already kind of started on this a while back. I put a link in, and it's at examples.tpxl.io. Maybe I'll share my screen so you can see it. So here I basically started on what would end up being post type tests potentially, or a bunch of example posts. So I just store the MF2 JSON, and then it all gets converted into HTML and whatever else it needs to be converted to. So I already have basic article notes, like video, audio post, article with a photo, etc., but it's not comprehensive, and it's not. It's just my opinions on stuff at the moment. It's not been verified by anyone else. And then the next part we need after that, I thought would be a micropub client. It's not really a client in a traditional sense, but sort of like how micropub.rocks works, where it posts stuff for you to test your endpoint. It would basically just post all these different post types, and it probably couldn't be quite as automated as micropub.rocks, because it'd be more seeing how they display on your own site, or and then you can work on making it look better, blah, 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 blah. But that thing, that test micropub client should also run locally, because people, if you're developing, you don't want a bunch of test posts on your live website. So it'd be nice to have it locally, or show people how to tunnel out their local development sites if that's what they're doing. And then for readers, I thought the best way of getting posts into a reader or a Microsoft server is just a feed. So there's already a feed from that examples website that I have. It already generates a H feed anyway, but it might be useful to have it as RSS feed or other types of feeds as well for other testing. And then there was the other part that got mentioned by Doug Beal sort of earlier on yesterday. And he was talking about how he has podcasts and he didn't know if his microformats was quite correct. Like, so he wanted some sort of kind of validator type thing that would check that he's not missing any properties. So if you think this post at this URL is a video post, it should have a video, and it's probably recommended that it also has a name, and then everything should probably also have an author, that sort of thing. But that's basically my main ideas. I'm not too sure where to go from here. You probably start by building out the list of post types, and then from there, the most useful thing for me anyway would be the Micropub client that would send them all, so I can test my site displays everything correctly. I don't know if anyone else has any ideas on it or any thoughts that I've not come up with.
No, this is actually kind of dope because I started trying to work on something like this myself. I called it, was just kind of silly. I'm gonna drop it in the chat. It was this. Literally, all I was supposed to do is to make like a valid H card. It's yeah. It's just gonna show one of my favorite cartoon characters. That's it. Yeah, something simple. But I just wanted it to show up on the page. Actually, he lives in New York now. That's incorrect. But yeah, like I was gonna expand this site to show like, you know, what an article looked like, what is like all of that stuff, and like something like this is good. I guess there's one thing we would kind of need. Microformats.org kind of serves as like the authoritative, rather the communal standard, and like, you know, what properties live where. What would be kind of nice for this is that we had like a generated way to do this. Like, oh yes, a podcast is like, you know, essentially an H feed with a bunch of audio posts. What does the post should have? Like, what should the feed have? Like, if we had like a machine friendly, but like still serializable to like friendly human output kind of way to do this, that you could just do this on the fly. You wouldn't have to do this. So you could like, somebody could just drop a link to their own URI, like you mentioned, and then just have it work. So I was like, have you considered like serializing that in some sort of schema, like be it XML, RDF, or I mean, the layer doesn't matter. Just like if that was like an idea that you had.
I've not thought too much about how to do it yet myself, because that's sort of something that Doug just mentioned the other day, and it's not the same, but sort of in the reverse order of what I was thinking of doing. So it's cool to see. But yeah, I definitely think it'd be a nice idea to have. But then it's also the thing of there's so many variables that you could put in. It's hard to do. But I guess it's similar to even the HTML validators that say it was valid, but you should have alt tags on images and stuff like that. But then you have to have a huge big list of rules, don't you, for every post type.
Yeah, on the Micropub side, I know that Clever Devil Jonathan was working on some type of like JSON schema that like you said, you can't say, okay, a Micropub, you know, has to have a check-in or anything like that. But it can say, okay, you know, these should be arrays, like they shouldn't be strings. And, you know, if this exists, maybe this should exist too. So kind of that kind of a thing, just for some real basic like validity parsing of the Micropub.
Yeah, so I think that's probably more relevant for like clients.
Yeah.
That you validate what a client sends. So I mean,
that's
like
true.
One example that I know that verifies microperformance in tests where the code is public is actually Mastodon. In their test suite, they validate that in the default theme the microperformance still work. And it's just a test in the test suite that, I mean, they have all kinds of tests that does use some example post from some database somewhere, but like they pass them and at least verify that like the name is still what is expected for that test post. And for instance, when we made a change to the microformats parsers and their test broke and then was okay, yeah, that they pinged someone from the IndieWeb community and they said, yep, that's to be expected. Sorry about that, but we had to change how the parsers work. And so they fixed the test, and I think they only had to fix the test because the markup already worked for both. But yeah, so they actually detected something that changed in the ecosystem, and that worked. And I guess that's and I mean, I guess there's kind of two things. Like one, let's have a central collection of examples, and the maybe in some ways easier one is if you have tests for your website or for your system, you can just make tests that verify that the post parses the same. Like you could even, I mean, for instance, someone mentioned yesterday, I think, that like they lost some property, they forgot to re-add some property to the template. And if you just had like a basic test that checks more or less, this test should fail when the shape of the result JSON changes. For instance, when a property suddenly goes missing, or suddenly a new property appears, or suddenly an array becomes longer or shorter.
Yeah, I definitely thought if there's a Micropub client that does posts all these examples, it can then also, whenever it creates the post, it gets the URL of the post, so it can instantly parse the page and check that all the properties are there.
That's pretty cool.
Kind of, yes. There's kind of the question: how specific do you want to be? I mean, I guess you can verify the basics, like if you post a photo, the photo obviously should appear in the output. But there may be things like if you post a check-in, the server might display or mark up the result differently. Like it could put things in an H card or not put them in an H card and just post the coordinates and things like that. Right. Or like your template or your processing pipeline adds white space somewhere in the text. That's slightly different. Like even the microformats parsers don't entirely agree about white space, which is kind of annoying, but it's one of the things that hasn't been quite high priority enough to hunt down everywhere and remove.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it'd mostly just be checking that the property exists, and that'd probably be enough. And then
especially for like the standard types, photo. There should be a photo property, and maybe check that the image is this. Checking the image is the same. It's not so easy because the endpoint might modify it, but like check that the thing actually has a photo property that returns a file. Something like that.
That makes sense. Well, that actually, one thing you mentioned, Sven, was like that, some of these things aren't like absolutely required, or some websites might treat it differently. And that actually reminds me of podcast validators, which again goes back to kind of one thing that Doug had mentioned in an earlier session. And podcast validators have like errors and then warnings and then like notes. Yeah. So that might, be interesting as well. Where like it might say, hey, listen, like this passes muster, but because, we passed in X, Y, or Z, like we would expect either A, B, or C, but it's not like your post is broken. Whereas if it's like your post is broken and not parsable, or if it passes a photo and no photo exists, then it might be like, yo, yeah, this is broken. So you might have different levels there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very appropriate. Like one instant one that comes to my mind in microformats is every post type is valid without an author, but you pretty much always want to have an author marked up somewhere. So that's like one that's
Probably, yeah.
Yep,
want to
absolutely.
have, not an absolute need to sort of.
The other
and on
thing,
the other hand, there's 10 ways of marking up the author.
That's true. The other thing that comes to mind is like verifying, right, that in a feed you have like URLs, right? Because if you have a feed of posts, most of the time, I mean, I don't know if it would necessarily fully be an error or not, but if you have a H entry inside of a feed with no URL, that's a pretty strong warning. Like no one can refer back to this permalink. Because that's an issue I notice occasionally in my reader is I'll get like a post from a feed and it has no URL, so I can't reply to it or like it or anything like that.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. And there's also then like the question, how do you test that continuously? Like, sure, some people might actually have like a test suite for their site, especially those of us who write their own software. But for instance, like I'd guess that for instance, many users of Known or WordPress like don't have a full testing instance of their site. And like, how do they notice if they tweak their theme or change a plugin that? And then it could be interesting to have like that they can make unlisted test posts somewhere or posts backdated to the 80s or something, so that they don't really appear on the site, but like have like a service running somewhere which like once a week parses those and revalidates that, yep, this still looks okay. And if not, I don't know, sends an email, sends a web mention.
Yeah, well, that actually brings up another issue, which is like a static site. And so in a static site, sometimes you have to wait for the rebuild. So I kind of wonder if, Grant, you mentioned micropub.rocks. And so I wonder if you could, say trigger all these tests. It can send all like the micropub requests and store the URL for later. And then say like, click here when your site is ready to, display has the post available for display. And then if you have a static site generator, you can go ahead and tell your website to rebuild. All the posts should be available at their URLs, and then you can click to have it run and test those. So there's even kind of a manual test case where you can say like, I want to run just one of these tests, or I want to like click run all tests, and it'll just like go down and do them all, and then have the button to view all the results or something.
Yeah, it looks like Chris is writing in the notes that so some of the WordPress plugins have already got some unit tests for certain things, but not sure. I don't think they'll be as in depth as what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the plugins, especially like since a lot of the things depends on that the theme actually displays it in WordPress. Like the plugins can test that internally the data is wired correctly, but they can't check that the output in a random site will work.
Yeah, absolutely. But I see if there is a testing tool made, it would help with both ends, like testing the back end of it, the server, Micropub server, and the front end as well. Although the Micropub server should mostly be handled by micropub.rocks already. And then after that, it's just storing any potential properties, isn't it? Which I think endpoints are meant to do anyway.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Well, it is a good idea to have like a test suite that uses Micropub, just because Micropub is a standard way of getting MF2 data into a web page. And micropub.rocks probably shouldn't be too concerned with like that the specific types work, and more really just test the basics of the protocol. So it makes sense to have a secondary test suite that does our specific blogging centric things, and then has Micropub as an option to get it in And if people have a static site generator and don't use Micropub, then they can translate the input into their format and validate the output still through the validation half.
Yeah, I agree. I did wonder what people would think would be the most important or most useful aspect of it. Would it be like, well, the WordPress unit tests that I gave an example of, the theme files? It tests stuff like if a single word is like 500 characters long, does your theme automatically cut it off and stuff doesn't overlap and things like that? I don't know if that is as useful. It is definitely useful, but I don't know if it's as useful in our use case as just the basic testing of post types.
I think the best start would be just the basic logic of, for instance, like what was mentioned, like that things in the feed have URLs, that properties have sensible content. When I'm trying to remember things that I've seen when debugging people's pages, like that sometimes that properties that typically are URL values are P instead of U, and so the wrong thing from a link gets surfaced. Or sometimes this nested properties, someone forgets that they have to put the property name and the thing in the same class, and then they have a nonsensical value and like a child object that's hanging around that doesn't do anything. For instance, I think some of his read posts I saw that they had what's read, and then the age side of the thing that was read was a separate element. So there was just like some random string in the read off property and a random age side that didn't make sense in the output, because at some point while shifting around content, they messed that up.
That makes sense.
Sorry, I just ran through Micropubs rock just quickly, and I have a really bad report. But yeah, it seems like it does like a lot of what's mentioned here. It's largely my report's failing because I don't allow the access token as part of the post payload. That just smells like a smell to me. So I didn't write it in there. But yeah, I guess like what it sounds like y'all are describing is like a linter. Like if it does, yes, the base minimum, that's good. But like one could do more. Like what's a foil without words? Or yeah.
Yeah, I think validator, linter, like, is not something that like it absolutely, like, there's ways that you can fail a linter, validator, etc. But like micropub.rocks is you either pass or fail this test. There is no in between. And I think definitely the focus is, okay, yes, you can pass or fail like a working micropub endpoint, but then what are the intricacies of post types within that? And what are best practices and things like that, which, like you said, with a linter, a validator, it's looking at those kind of intricacies that sometimes can't be turned directly into a pass or fail.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, example that, like, for instance, IndieWebify.me has the thing that, like, it checks your edge card, and I think if you don't have a photo, it like says you might want to add a photo to your edge card, something like that.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
And really, like, strict adherence to some standard is probably something that each individual software project has to pick for itself, what exactly it wants to enforce there. And the central collection can provide ideas for what could be tricky. So it might make sense to have example posts with 200 letter words in the title.
Yeah.
But it's not something you check. That's then something that the project can choose. Okay, that's a problem that looks bad. We want to do the following, and we then can add to our own test suite something that covers that.
Yeah.
And it's more an inspiration of what's going wrong than like something you can strictly say that's the correct behavior for that.
I'd be interested to know if anyone's sort of tried this before. Like, Eddie, how did you test in indigenous that stuff displays correctly? Did you sort of look at your own feeds that you follow and see what works, what doesn't work?
Yeah, so for that, I actually did two things that actually covered quite a bit of ground, which was I followed my all feed and I followed Aaron Parecki's all feed. And I tell you what, he's right when he says don't follow his all feed. When I was first building Indigenous, I had a channel just for Aaron Parecki's all feed, and that thing always had something new in it. But that definitely helped see a wide variety of different post types and everything, and see how they were displaying in Indigenous. Yeah. But I think the feed you have created is actually super helpful, and I'll probably as I'm making changes in indigenous, I'm probably going to utilize that because I think it's more well-rounded, because I had to kind of watch it over time and look at the feed at the right time when Aaron had done different activities. So I won't be stuck in as Aaron as much using your nice example feed now, Grant.
Yeah, you do definitely have to sort of just keep looking at what pops up and then change things if it doesn't work.
Exactly.
But yeah, I did pop that feed into together at some point to test, and sort of it worked enough that I was happy with it. But the issue inside our reader is, well, inside the server more, the Microsoft server is, well, in Aperture's case, it'll delete posts after a certain amount of time. So my test feed that I had has disappeared now. So I need to go and re-add it again if I want to actually look at it.
Yeah, that's a problem. So yeah, I guess so yeah, I think starting with creating the micropub client, right? That automatically creates these things and gets the URL back and stores that for later checking is probably step one of that project. And then step two, you can then fetch those URLs and parse them and then start coming to the validation rules. And I guess one thing would be useful is like, what are the post types that you want to try to test on? I think we have some lists, but I think there are some like commonly accepted post types that aren't necessarily official microformats post types. So that might be something where there's a little bit more nuance there as to what to include and what to not include. I think check-ins are obviously a pretty common enough one that you probably want to do that. And of course, you have all the official microformats that need it. So you've got likes and notes, bookmarks, articles.
Yeah, so on like the wiki page, which is posts, types of posts, it's just it's got note, article, reply, RSVP, photo, like, video, and repost is like the official-ish ones, I think. And then the next list down is check-ins, events, presentation, which I don't think I've seen personally, bookmark, jam, read, watch, review, listen, collection, venue. And after that, sort of ones that people don't do so much, apart from, I think, issue is probably used more now. Audio is definitely used a bit. And the rest of them are sort of one person or less, I think, mainly. So that's like a pretty solid list of things you can definitely try and test for already.
Yeah, definitely. What was the URL for that again?
IndieWeb.org/posts.
Posts. Oh, okay.
And then there's a subsection just called type of posts.
There it is. Nice. Yeah, that's pretty good. And I think it's nice because it seems like the higher up is the more commonly used. So it's literally like you could just kind of take that list and start at the top and start working your way down with how much time you have. And by the time you start getting down to the bottom, you can start deciding when you want to stop or which things you want to actually do and ignore. But the top two sections seem pretty safe.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. I'm sure if you go in and edit it, it says has some details about why each thing is in each section. Part of it, at least, is to do with the number of people. So it does actually say there, yeah, 3 websites use it. And then if it gets to, I think, 5, then it goes into sort of potential for becoming official. And then I can't remember how it becomes official.
I think that goes through actual post type discovery, which I believe yeah, I'm not sure how it goes through that review.
There's a GitHub technically there's like for post type discovery, the document there's a GitHub repository where there's tracked. And for instance, Aaron recently started collecting enough check-in examples to make sure that check-in can get added.
Gotcha. Nice.
Martin, you're making noise.
Sorry.
Well, I think definitely a first step for me would be to get that those example sites. I think I don't have. I do already have the majority of post types, I think, on there, but I should go through and make sure I have sort of those main ones that are listed on that IndieWeb wiki page, and then from there, that site's open. Anyone can add or remove post types from it, and then the feeds and everything are available for people to use as well, so it can get piped into a Micropub client from there or anything else.
Nice. Yeah, that's good.
I also quite like it has like the basic HTML. Well, it tells you the HTML code, but also renders what the post, a sort of generic version of a post would look like. So it's quite good to check, hey, does this sort of look like what I have on my site? Even if you want to do something very different, it's still nice to see, here's what it could look like.
Awesome. I guess, do we have any other thoughts on this, or we feel like wrapping up the session?
Nope. Oh, yeah, no. Just get to go to schema or something sooner than later. Because this is definitely, personally, maybe this is me just rambling a little bit, but like, this would be like one easy way to generate like a whole bunch of themes quickly. Like if you have the base outline, this is also part of a dark secret project I'm working on, but to be able to switch things quickly on the site would be nice. But this is like a precursor to that, because then you know like the building blocks of the site, like what the headers went out. This could like funnel it down a road. So I'll definitely be peeking and talk about this in the future.
Nice. Awesome. Cool. This was our last session. So we've got in just about 20 minutes. We've got like session conclusion, which isn't really anything much. If anyone has any like really amazing things they want to share with other people, not as big of a deal because we have had only one like track, whereas in a normal IndieWebCamp it has multiple. So it's nice to have people like give the summaries from the sessions. So I don't know if we'll really do that as much. The project's kickoff is really, I'm thinking with that, basically whatever people are wanting to work on, they can kind of share that with each other so that if there's any synergy where people are wanting to work on multiple things, they can kind of touch base over the next 24 hours before demo time and be able to work on projects together. So that's really, it technically says an hour on the schedule, but we'll be there for like 15 or 20 minutes here in about 20 minutes and figure out what projects everyone's working on, see if there's any things that match up, and then people can work on their demos. And then we have on the schedule, it says create a collaboration room. Basically, Jitsi will be running on the Indie web server the whole time. So anyone who wants to just create a random room on the Jitsi server will be able to over the next 24 hours. So people can chat either audio or video and share screens and stuff as they collaborate. So cool. All right. Well, I will see anyone who attends the project's kickoff in about 20 minutes.
Nice.